Shakespeare's my favorite in all of English lit. Some people pitch a fit when I start asking who wrote those marvelous plays. They tell me to shut my trap, that they don't want to flap. Nothing to unwrap about a new authorship mystery. Truly, though, a merchant in grain who wrote knavery, as with Richard III, though Henry V is possibly worse. And in comedy, how about Dogberry and the Dromios and Juliet's nurse? Shakespeare is infinite, Shakespeare's illiterate. Something here doesn't fit the Stratford story. Someone illuminate me. As for tragedy, there's Mark Antony. Lear and Hamlet are absolute gold. Puck is magical, but most tragical is the rubbish we have been told. Something just won't cohere, Stratford's a myth, I fear. Who is this Earl de Vere that I've heard of? Someone illuminate me. In those plays, I want illumination.
Now say, Chatillon, what would France with us?
Thus, after greeting, speaks the King of France, in my behavior to the majesty, the borrowed majesty of England here.
Strange beginning, borrowed majesty.
It is a strange beginning, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. First, Shakespeare illuminated us. And here at Shakespeare Illuminated, we seek to return the favor by illuminating his plays. I'm Michael Delahoyde, professor and confessor of a Shakespeare addiction that I never expected during the first half of my life. We all love Shakespeare and want to appreciate the brilliance of his works. And when considering the playwright's choices, and sometimes enigmatic or just weird and baffling passages to speculate, how can we understand him further through consideration of the Shakespeare Authorship Question? That is, if we scrape off the wearisomely ridiculous insistence that the works were written by a Stratfordian grain merchant Shakespeare, and instead by Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, using the pen name Shakespeare. This is the so-called Oxfordian perspective. Are the Shakespeare works better illuminated? You might want to turn your volume down here for a moment. Yes! So please note, when I refer to Oxford, it's usually biographical. When I say Shakespeare, I mean Oxford as the playwright. Always do that mental translation, please. When I refer to the illiterate grain merchant of Stratford, I'll say Shakespeare, as it was recorded in Stratford under the various spellings, and as he tried to scrawl it in the only written record we have of that guy, 6 signatures on legal documents. But I guarantee that Shakespeare won't come up very often. He's just not very relevant. Sorry, Stanley. The Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship's website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, can inform you much more about this Oxfordian perspective, as can my own site, michaeldelahoyde.org. And as always, be careful what you do with the Oxfordian information given in this series and on either of those websites, and realize that the issue of the Shakespeare Authorship Question is more than controversial and too typically meets with rage and retaliation, especially in schools and colleges where you risk being labeled a heretic. We don't want anyone flunking English because of someone else being ill-informed or just intolerant. But here you might retrieve some of the joy that was beaten out of you at some point. We're going to explore now what even historians often consider one of the worst kings, depicted in a play about which critical consensus amounts to meh. Most of us were first introduced to King John as a villain in some version of the Robin Hood story, or maybe with his mother, Catherine Eleanor of Aquitaine, in the film The Lion in Winter. Here, his father, Henry II, and the older brothers are dead. Shakespeare conflates various political episodes from John's reign and makes up some other events, including a character called the Bastard, who is acknowledged as the illegitimate son of the late Richard Lionheart, and morphs in the course of this play from cheeky side commentator, especially concerning his disdain for the cheesy politics and the selfish shifting and shifty alliances, to the most noble and patriotic voice. Along the way, we are in conflict with France. No, we're allied with France. We're at war with France. No, we're good. John is excommunicated. No, John is unexcommunicated. We kill a kid. No, of course we don't. Oh, no, he dies anyway. English lords defect to France. Oh, no, they're back. And in the end, John does not live in our hearts forever after. But maybe things will be okay. So here are some questions we want to ask. Why does Shakespeare just this once dip back so far in history, the early 13th century, to depict such a lousy king? Why does Shakespeare invent and depict the bastard as the most compelling character? And what does the bastard mean when he rails against commodity? Why does Shakespeare ignore the most significant historical event of John's reign? So if you don't know about the Robin Hood stuff, you might be more politically inclined and realize, yeah, what happened to the signing of the Magna Carta? Well, if you have formal questions, you can hit the Q&A button below. You should be seeing that. If I don't address these during the show, stick around for a Q&A immediately afterwards. Meanwhile, you can enter general and formal comments into chat, which I'll try to keep an eye on too. And now back to Shakespeare's King John, already in progress. So we had a strange beginning. It's a question of John's legitimacy in terms of the throne. Well, what we're coping with here is maybe some material from a much, much earlier play. In 1538, there was a propagandistic, very anti-Catholic play by one John Bale. He's one of the first dramatists to write plays about actual historical figures. King Johann, and seems to have been revised in 1561. We think that this was presented before Queen Elizabeth at Hedingham Castle, the home of the de Veres, when she visited there. And besides, the 16th Earl was a patron of Bale, and the play was only available in manuscript much, much later. So this might have influenced a young de Vere. Then we have this problematic, troublesome reign of John, King of England. It's published in 1591, but no doubt written much, much earlier. And any theory that you want to have about the relationship between troublesome reign and the canonical Shakespeare King John, you'll find it. They guess absolutely everything about this. But even Harold Bloom, arch Stratfordian, thinks that it's a case where Shakespeare is revising his own work. And I think Ramon Jimenez has settled the case definitively when he has done thorough work showing the relationship between even words and phrases from Troublesome Reign to the play King John that we know, including what's left out, what's left in, what's close and assumed already. So that's that background. Now, I think I should say here something that doesn't exist, because I don't know where else to put it. And that is, what about not mentioning the Magna Carta, the Great Charter? There's absolute omission about that. And turns out, if you take the Oxfordian perspective, you'll realize, okay, this makes sense. Actually, it would make sense in other terms too, because politically, what this charter did was to curtail the power of the monarch and give more power to the barons. And John was forced to sign this. Well, you don't want to present that before Queen Elizabeth and have this shaky notion about the legitimacy of the powers of the throne. But the questionable title to the crown is shared by John, as we'll see in a moment, and Elizabeth. And so this is touchy politically already. Furthermore, we don't hear about Robert de Vere, 3rd Earl of Oxford. This is Oxford's ancestor. And why should we? Well, he was instrumental among those barons in getting this done, and he also suffered the punishment afterwards when John went on a vengeance spree, which you can see an example of in the movie Ironclad, if you like. But Robert de Vere joined the rebellion against John. He was one of the nobles who made John sign the Magna Carta, curtailing his powers. And afterwards, John laid siege to Hedingham Castle, the home of the de Veres. So it's as if better politically to erase the memory of this particular Earl of Oxford in the past. And I read somewhere, too, that the 3rd Earl was also excommunicated, and that'll be a theme in our play today. But I don't understand this. He was excommunicated for insolence? Cool. All right. Well, we'll get back to the play here. And as I said, the strange beginning is that we've got the French representative questioning the legitimacy of John on the throne because there's someone else involved. We're seeing John's mother, Eleanor, who is more stalwart and powerful than he seems to be ultimately. But here's the continuation of what we started with at the very start of the play.
Silence, good mother. Hear the embassy.
Philip of France, in right and true behalf of thy deceased brother, Geoffrey's son, Arthur Plantagenet, lays most lawful claim to this fair island and the territories, to Ireland, Poitiers, Anjou, Touraine, Maine, desiring thee to lay aside this sword which swears usurpingly these several titles, and place these same into young Arthur's hand, thy nephew and right royal sovereign.
What follows if we disallow of this?
The proud control of fierce and bloody war to enforce these rights so forcibly withheld.
Here have we war for war and blood for blood, controlment for controlment. So answer, France.
Then take my king's defiance from my mouth, the farthest limits of my embassy.
Bear mine to him, and so depart in peace. Be thou as lightning in the eyes of France, for ere thou canst report, I will be there. The thunder of my cannon shall be heard, so hence. Be thou the trumpet of our wrath and sullen presage of your own decay. An honorable conduct let him have, Pembroke, look to it. Farewell, Chatillon.
What now, my son? Have I not ever said how that ambitious Constance would not cease till she had kindled France and all the world upon the right and party of her son? This might have been prevented and made whole with very easy arguments of love, which now the manage of 2 kingdoms must with fearful bloody issue arbitrate.
Our strong possession and our right for us.
Your strong possession much more than your right, or else it must go wrong with you and me. So much my conscience whispers in your ear, which none but heaven, and you and I, shall hear.
So even his mother acknowledges he's king mostly because of squatters' rights rather than legitimacy. The situation is that one of the older brothers of John, Geoffrey, has this son, Arthur, and the French think that he has a better claim to the throne, and so are challenging John. And they're kind of right, actually. So we immediately face a situation of stand-ins and posers and imposters in their positions. And indeed, John comes across not too bad early in the play, but increasingly more like the popular culture image that you get in the Disney film and the Robin Hood films of being just weak and waffling, and we need somebody to fill a more noble role here. Well, John decides he's going to tax the churches. We'll see how that goes. The abbeys and the priories shall pay to help fund a war. And this is called a strange controversy when, intruding upon these political matters, come two brothers. And one is Philip and the other's Robert, but they have a kind of a odd situation going on, also involving legitimacy and inheritance. So here's what we hear from this new character who becomes really the star of the play.
What men are you?
Your faithful subject I, a gentleman, born in Northamptonshire, an eldest son, as I suppose, to Robert Falconbridge, a soldier by the honour-giving hand of Coeur de Lion, knighted in the field.
You came not of one mother, then, it seems.
Almost certain of one mother, mighty king. That is well known, and, as I think, one father. But for the certain knowledge of that truth, I put your o'er to heaven and to my mother. Of that I doubt, as all men's children may.
Out on thee, rude man! Thou dost shame thy mother and wound her honour with this diffidence.
I, madam? No, I have no reason for it. That is my brother's plea, and none of mine. The which, if you can prove, pops me out at least from fair £500 a year. Heaven guard my mother's honour and my land.
A good blunt fellow. Why, being younger born, doth he lay claim to thine inheritance?
I know not why, except to get the land. But once he slandered me with bastardy. But whether I be as true begot or no, that still I lay upon my mother's head, that I am as well begot, my liege. Fair fall the bones that took the pains for me. Compare our faces and be judge yourself. If old Sir Robert did beget us both, and were our father and this son like him. O old Sir Robert, father on my knee, I give heaven thanks I was not like to thee.
Why, what a madcap hath heaven lent us here?
He hath a trick of Coeur de Lion's face. The accent of his tongue affecteth him. Do you not read some tokens of my son in the large composition of this man?
Mine eye hath well examined his parts, and finds him perfect Richard. Sirrah, speak. What doth move you to claim your brother's land?
Because he hath a half face, like my father. With half that face would he have all my land. A half face groat £500 a year.
Whether hadst thou rather be a Falconbridge, and like thy brother to enjoy thy land, or the reputed son of Coeur de Lion, lord of thy presence and no land beside?
Madam, and if my brother had my shape, as I had his, Sir Robert's his like him, And if my legs were two such riding rods, my arms such eelskins stuffed, my face so thin that in mine ear I durst not stick a rose, lest men should say, look where 3 farthings goes. And to his shape were heir to all this land, would I might never stir from off this place. I would give it every foot to have his face. I would not be Sir Nob in any case.
I like thee well. Wilt thou forsake thy fortune, bequeath thy land to him, and follow me? I am a soldier, and now bound to France.
Brother, take you my land. I take my chance. Your faith hath got £500 a year, yet sell your face for 5 pence, and 'tis dear. Madam, I'll follow you unto the death.
Nay, I would have you go before me thither.
Our country manners give our betters way.
What is thy name?
Philip, my liege. So is my name begun. Philip, good old Sir Robert's wife's eldest son.
From henceforth bear his name, whose form thou bear'st. Kneel thou down, Philip, but rise more great. Arise, Sir Richard and Plantagenet.
Brother by my mother's side, give me your hand. My father gave me honour, yours gave land. How blessed by the hour, by night or day, when I was God, Sir Robert was away.
The very spirit of Plantagenet. I am thy grandam, Richard. Call me so.
Madam, by chance, but not by truth. What though? Something about a little from the right, in at the window, or else o'er the hatch. Who dares not stir by day must walk by night. And have is have, however men do catch. Near or far off, well won is still well shot. And I am I, however I was begot.
Things there give us some identity clues. One is I am I, which comes close to that almost blasphemous utterance of de Vere in a letter to Burleigh. I am that I am, the name of God. But also, have is have. Well, Oxford got a little bit better when he penned All's Well, no, As You Like It, where he says, to have is to have, the infinitive form, which in French would be avere, or avere, A-V-E-R-E. Avere is avere. So that assertion of himself is appropriate to what we just saw, where you've got a character who would rather be declared a bastard, an illegitimate son in the line of royalty, rather than have his estates and his lands, which of course we know the Earl of Oxford did pretty poorly in retaining real estate. But maybe because did he prefer the notion that he was royal? So there's a little succession or Prince Tudor theory operating there. It's called this character a madcap, and that's another term used for Oxford. But beyond all of that, you've got this issue of bastardy. This is a good enough reason to import this completely fictional character into this story, when Oxford, in addition to his political commentary, is struggling with the concept of bastardy. So we know that he had a son that was illegitimate, born of Anne Vavasor. We know that he suspected the legitimacy of his oldest daughter, Elizabeth, from when he was away in Italy. But more pertinent and personal to him would have been accusations of his bastardy. So his half-sister, a woman from the 16th Earl's first marriage, declared in 1563 that the 16th Earl's second marriage was illegitimate, and therefore Oxford and his sister were illegitimate, and therefore give me some land. So this was troubling and disturbing to his sense of self at a tender age. But later on, additionally, those libelists, Howard and Arundel, dredged up an old story when they were coming up with accusations against Oxford for Elizabeth to disfavor him. They brought up this fact of the half-sister declaring him illegitimate. And the other incident that they bring up is that he had recalled a youthful rage that he had had and a humiliation when the queen taunted him, maybe teasingly, saying he was a bastard, and he burst into tears and dashed from the room. So it was a touchy issue with this guy. And you can tell from the E.O. poem, Loss of Good Name, or Loss of My Good Name, that although it's vague there, this is something that tormented him. And as for the bursting into tears, that is a touchy issue always in Shakespeare too. And it's almost a bit sexist when you hear about tears being womanish. But it's a theme, as Rendrea has pointed out, throughout this play, that male tears keep coming up again and again. So he seems to be trying to legitimize it, at least in this play, that it's okay, guys, to cry. Next, we end up in this mess where with the politics and France. After the situation is resolved here and the bastard embraces his bastardy and Eleanor embraces him as a grandchild coming from Richard Lionheart, the politics reemerge. And before that actually flames up, the bastard has a little soliloquy at the end where he says that he imagines his new life as a kind of a illegitimate, but yet in the club, royal. And he thinks, okay, I'll have dinners and I will have the luxury of being able to forget people's names. And I will sit around with my toothpick. And it always bugs me because this is not the only place in Shakespeare where you hear about a toothpick. Apparently, in Elizabethan days, it was not déclassé to have a toothpick. And we know that Oxford had an affectation of that sort too. So that would have driven me crazy, but it was the early days. And maybe it wasn't a bad idea when you consider the color of Elizabeth's teeth towards the end. She might have done something more dentally responsible herself. By the way, Richard Lionheart, who's always the hero in those Robin Hood versions of this story, or the earlier part of this story, probably did not speak English. So the great English hero, ow. Also, and I can't have this confirmed yet, I'm looking, but I was told at one time that Richard had said, "The English are dogs, good for nothing but taxes." Well, sorry to puncture that, but in any case, hooray for England, because we are at war with France, or in contention with France. And what we get in Act 2 is outside the gate of Angers, but they probably would say Angers, where the French are declaring that Arthur, the son of the late Geoffrey, and therefore older brother, has the right to the English throne. And the English, behind John, say, no, absolutely not. And they're fighting in front of Angers. And those guys on the wall are saying, well, you got to duke it out and settle all of this. So in the meantime, Arthur's mother, who's still alive, Constance, is freaking out and, of course, siding with anybody who's going to give Arthur the throne. But here's where the mess comes. And I don't even know if it's worth trying to sort all this out because it's so confusing. And the bastard will have the final word about the ridiculousness of all this shifting alliances and all. So they all make their cases in front of the representatives of Angers. And finally, the representative up on the wall says that, well, you guys need to settle it. We will respect whoever's the King of England, but who is? So the French and the English decide, okay, we have to fight, duke it out. So they go to war. Then they both come back and declare, oh, we only killed that many, and so many of ours was killed, and we win. And they both say we win. And therefore open up your gates. Well, no, I don't think we're going to do that after all. And instead, the suggestion is, wait a minute, here's a possible solution, and it's a cool political little shifty thing we can do here. What if the Prince of France, Louis, married one of Eleanor's granddaughters, Blanche, who's a young girl who, for some reason, has come along to see the fun? And we have that alliance. What if we do that way? Yeah, that's a good idea, they all think. So after some more ridiculousness where we decide, I know, let's all just attack the city. You go from that side and I go from this side, and the bastards all into the war part. This solution is put forth, and everybody except Constance and anybody with a conscience is going to be, perfectly happy for the moment. After all this politics, though, the bastard is the one who has a soliloquy, and he just is shaking his head at the ridiculousness of all of this, and he rails. And that's an important point. So in this next scene, you see what he has to say about this odd concept of commodity.
Mad world, mad kings, mad composition. John, to stop Arthur's title in the whole, hath willingly departed with a part. And France, whose armour conscience buckled on, whom zeal and charity brought to the field as God's own soldier, rounded in the ear with that same purpose changer, that sly devil, that broker, that still breaks the pate of faith, a daily break vow, he that wins of all, of kings, of beggars, old men, young men, maids, who having no external thing to lose but the word maid, cheats the poor maid of that. That smooth-faced gentleman, tickling commodity. Commodity, the bias of the world. The world, who of itself is pleased well, made to run even upon even ground, till this advantage, this vile drawing bias, this sway of motion, this commodity, makes it take head from all indifferency, from all direction, purpose, course, intent, and this same bias, this commodity, this board, this broker, this all-changing word, clapped on the outward eye of fickle France, hath drawn him from his own determined aid, from a resolved and honourable war, to a most base and vile concluded peace. And why rail I on this commodity? But for because he hath no wooed me yet. Not that I have the power to clutch my hand, when this fair angels would salute my palm, but for my hand as unattempted yet. Like a poor beggar, raileth on the rich. Well, while as I'm a beggar, I will rail, and say there is no sin but to be rich. And being rich, my virtue then shall be to say there is no vice but beggary. Since kings break faith upon commodity, gain be my lord, for I will worship thee.
So it's an odd word, commodity, and it's probably an odd concept for the age of Shakespeare. because the difference between the Middle Ages and the early modern period is mind-blowing. It's just the value system is completely different. And we can see that in Hamlet when he wonders about just consuming. What is a man if he's just going to be eating and sleeping all the time? But commodity is a subtler term. And I don't think I can find a real consensus on what exactly Shakespeare means, but here is a list of synonyms: expedient self-interest, worldliness, compliance, compromise, policy, diplomacy, expediency. Charles Beauclerk calls it new opportunism. And it's really seems to me like just selling out because of which way the wind is blowing and having no moral center. But when you think of it in terms of commodification, that has just happened with the deal between the Prince of France and Blanche of England. You are commodifying kids, really. And additionally, John promises as dowry 30,000 marks of English coin. Well, that happens to be the same amount in pounds that Queen Elizabeth offered the French Prince Alençon when she was trying to get him to just kind of go away and get out of court and keep him hanging on for all those years that he did, thinking that maybe he's going to be King of France. But we want to get rid of him. The other interesting aspect for me, of course, as some of you may know, is that the bastard here acknowledges that he rails, that he's going to be someone who rails. And railing, I have insisted elsewhere, is an invention of Shakespeare's, kind of a sub-art form, secondary art form, where so many of his characters just rail. They just come out with something and spew venom or anger at whatever it is that's annoying them. So you have Benedict, who says this against marriage is his railing. Timon of Athens, Kent in Lear does the longest string of railing insults against another character. Supposedly, Feste in Twelfth Night is someone who rails too, although I don't think we see it. It's just that Oxford so identifies with the railing that those are the characters that he inhabits. And in fact, we have on record that he is accused of railing crazily about anybody, no matter how virtuous they are. And modern day, there are a good number of stand-up comedians who made their fortune on railing about things. Okay, so we've got deals being made, and at the end of Act 2, we have some perspective on the whole thing. And the oddity here is that I don't know that it's particularly inconsistent, but the bastard says, well, I'll be a sellout too. I just, want my bucks. But that's not the character that we get afterwards. And I don't even know if it's convincing that he's going to want to be a sellout himself in the first half of the play. But there are other matters that divide the play into two parts where it seems to be more inconsistency, and therefore this play suffers in reputation. Anyway, because of the deal now ousting Arthur, Constance is in a frenzy of disbelief and misery about the sellout deal that leaves Arthur in the lurch. She's pretty histrionic. She throws herself on the ground and she screams, and later on we'll hear about her tearing at her hair and all of this, which becomes pretty tiresome eventually, even though she has a legitimate case. The next problem is, and in this episodic play that doesn't sometimes cohere, is that because of what John's done to the possessions of the church, legate of the Pope is sent to him. And this Cardinal Pandolf confronts John, and we've got a new problem with another political entity, even though it's the church. So here is a scene where they face off.
Hail, you anointed deputies of heaven! To thee, King John, my holy errand is. I, Pandolf of fair Milan Cardinal, and from Pope Innocent the legate here, do in his name religiously demand why thou against the Church, our holy mother, so wilfully dost spurn, and force perforce keep Stephen Langton, chosen Archbishop of Canterbury, from that holy see. This, in our foresaid Holy Father's name, Pope Innocent, I do demand of thee.
What earthly name to interrogatories can task the free breath of a sacred king? Thou canst not, Cardinal, devise a name so slight, unworthy, and ridiculous to charge me to an answer as the Pope. Tell him this tale, and from the mouth of England add thus much more, that no Italian priest shall tithe or toll in our dominions, but as we under heaven are supreme head, so under him that great supremacy where we do reign, we will alone uphold, without the assistance of a mortal hand. So tell the Pope, all reverence set apart to him and his usurped authority.
It's interesting that we've got the Milan connection here, because some Oxfordians have said that Pandolf's giving voice to the Jesuit propaganda going on in Elizabeth's reign, and in fact is almost parallel to the Spanish ambassador Mendoza in this regard, who had undertaken the direction of the Catholic movement in England. So that's touchy. But also, Milan was so fiercely Catholic, apparently, maybe oppressively so, that Oxford, in his Italian travels, avoided that place. Didn't want to go there. Pandolf is going to be called next also meddling priest, which is a quote from Henry VIII regarding Thomas More. But here you've got, however exaggerated in history, you've got the actual situation that's going on in England during Elizabeth's reign in these various factions. So not just the French, alliance with the French, not alliance with the French. The Catholic problem is perpetual, and we don't have Spaniards here, but that's always a shadow over the politics of the time. Well, Pandolf decides that he's got to go all out against the English here and against John. So what he's going to do is excommunicate John. Oh, dear God, please no. But the relevance here is, of course, that Elizabeth also was excommunicated. And by the way, along with another theme, Elizabeth was also considered a bastard by some, and in the records and parliamentary decisions, and Henry VIII and her enemies or Catholic enemies. So bastardy and anti-Catholicism are mostly relevant here. And why else would you go to this obscure king to dramatize anything unless it was completely relevant to the times? So here is another exchange with Pandolf and John, and this time we've got Constance, the mother of Arthur, who some want on the throne instead of John, involved in this next exchange.
Though Philip and all the kings of Christendom are led so grossly by this meddling priest, dreading the curse that money may buy out, and by the merit of vile gold, dross, dust, purchase corrupted pardon of a man, who in that sale pardon from himself, though you and all the rest so grossly led this juggling witchcraft with revenue cherish, yet I alone, do me oppose against the Pope, and count his friends my foes.
Then by the lawful power that I have, thou shalt stand cursed and excommunicate, and blessed shall be he that doth revolt from his allegiance to an heretic, and meritorious shall that hand be called, canonized, and worshipped as a saint, that takes away by any secret course thy hateful life.
O lawful let it be, that I have room with Rome to curse the while. Good Father Cardinal, cry thou amen to my keen curses, for without my wrong there is no tongue that hath power to curse him right.
There's law and warrant, lady, for my curse.
And for mine too, when law can do no right. Let it be lawful, that law bar no wrong. Law cannot give my child his kingdom here, for he that holds his kingdom holds the law. Therefore, since law itself is perfect wrong, how can the law forbid my tongue to curse?
Philip of France, on peril of a curse, let go the hand of that arch-heretic, and raise the power of France upon his head, unless he do submit himself to Rome.
So France is horrified at the situation because they had reached an alliance with England. And when you see a production, which good luck, because it's rarely done, John and Philip of France are actually holding hands here. And it's as if Pandulph is trying to break up a marriage between the two. Pandulph is crazier than that bit about Sally Claw in Henry V, in terms of being loquacious and giving us a bunch of sophistry when he tries to explain about faith and how you're allowed to break faith and all this other nonsense here too. But as for, you know, the authority from the church to kill, real sacred church, in a little weird scene, we see the bastard come on, and he has been annoyed by the Duke of Austria all along. It's an anachronism historically. The Duke of Austria that Shakespeare has in mind has long been dead, but he was in fact an enemy of Richard I. So the motivation there for the bastard, who is the illegitimate son of Richard I, is to hate this guy. He's been making snarky comments along the side all along when there have been negotiations going on. But at this point, surprisingly, he comes in and he's got the guy's decapitated head with him. We never see the action of all of this. And then John is freaked out because he's worried about his mother. And the bastard just says, no, I rescued her. No problem whatsoever. And John has captured little Arthur, too, and given custody to a new character named Hubert. Historically, we're going to hear that he's dragged back to England, but the truth is he never was. And there's some more enigmas to come. So John realizes, as so many kings in Shakespeare do, and as Henry II did too, there are these obstacles in the way. There are these problems. And you immediately start thinking, oh yeah, Richard III had a problem, didn't he? Oh yeah, Henry IV had a problem, didn't he? Well, so too, John has a problem here. And he calls in Hubert just to say what a great guy Hubert is. And wow, it's so sincere.
Come hither, Hubert. Oh, my gentle Hubert, we owe thee much. Within this wall of flesh there is a soul counts thee her creditor, and with advantage means to pay thy love. And, my good friend, thy voluntary oath lives in this bosom dearly cherished. Give me thy hand. I had a thing to say, but I will fit it in some better time. By heaven, Hubert, I am almost ashamed to say what good respect I have of thee.
I am much bounden to your majesty.
Good friend, thou hast no cause to say so yet, but thou shalt have. And creep time ne'er so slow, yet it shall come from me to do thee good. I had a thing to say, but let it go. The sun is in the heaven, and the proud day, attended with the pleasures of the world, is all too wanton and too full of gods to give me audience. I would into thy bosom pour my thoughts, but alas, I will not. Yet I love thee well, and by my troth, I think thou lovest me well.
So well that what you bid me undertake, though that my death were adjunct to my act, by heaven I would do it.
Do not I know thou wouldst? Good Hubert, Hubert, Hubert. Throw thine eye on yon young boy. I'll tell thee what, my friend. He is a very serpent in my way. And wheresoe'er this foot of mine doth tread, he lies before me. Dost thou understand me? Thou art his keeper.
And I'll keep him so, that he shall not offend your majesty.
Death,
My lord,
brave,
he shall not live.
enough. I could be merry now. Hubert, I love thee. Well, I'll not say what I intend for thee. Remember. Madam, fare you well. I'll send those powers o'er to your majesty.
Yeah. As Dionne Warwick sang so eloquently, promises, promises. How vague and sinister. Charles Beauclerk also points out that this archetype of a boy king seems to be haunting Shakespeare over and over. And again, maybe the question about Oxford's own parentage and legitimacy and what should have been his and what kingdom other than the theater ought to have been his seems to be relevant. Well, the French are in a funk about what's been going on, and Arthur's been captured, and there's English successes all over the place. And Constance, Arthur's mother, is in a tizzy, quite rightly. And let's go immediately into her and her reactions in light of the supposed temporary winners right now.
Thou art not wholly to belie me so. I am not mad. This hair I tear is mine. My name is Constance. I was Geoffrey's wife. Young Arthur is my son, and he is lost. I am not mad. I would to heaven I were, for then 'tis like I should forget myself. Oh, if I could, what grief should I forget? Preach some philosophy to make me mad, and thou shalt be canonized cardinal. For being not mad, but sensible of grief, my reasonable part produces reason, how I may be delivered of these woes, and teaches me to kill or hang myself. If I were mad, I should forget my son, or madly think a babe of clouts were he. I am not mad. Too well, I feel the different plague of each calamity.
Bind up those tresses. Oh, what love I note in the fair multitude of those her hairs! Where but by chance a silver drop hath fallen, even to that drop 10,000 wiry friends do glue themselves in sociable grief, like true, inseparable, faithful loves, sticking together in calamity.
To England, if you will.
Bind up your hairs.
Yes, that I will. And wherefore should I do it? I tore them from their bonds and cried aloud, oh, that these hands could so redeem my son, as they have given these hairs their liberty. But now I envy at their liberty, and will again commit them to their bonds, because my poor child is a prisoner. And, Father Cardinal, I have heard you say that we shall see and know our friends in heaven. If that be true, I shall see my boy again. For since the birth of Cain, the first male child, to him that did but yesterday suspire, there was not such a gracious creature born. But now will canker sorrow eat my bud, and chase the native beauty from his cheek, and he will look as hollow as a ghost, and dim and meagre as an ague's fit. And so he'll die, and rising so again, when I shall meet him in the court of heaven, I shall not know him. Therefore never, never must I behold my pretty author more.
You hold too heinous a respect of grief.
He talks to me that never had a son.
That never had a son. And that'll echo for some of you from Macbeth too, for another time. John is called misplaced. And following this, we get Pandulph involved in some more Machiavellian machinations with Louis, the Prince of France, who whimpers about how everything was promised to him, but he's got nothing. Pandulph convinces him, no, you're misreading this. If you had the experience, you'd realize that John has Arthur, and he'll kill him. And if he hasn't killed him already, if you march on England, then he'll kill him then. And then the throne will be open to you because the English won't tolerate it. And it'll all work out, really. It's what we might call a handy commodity, I guess. So Prince Arthur is a political pawn in it all. And it is perhaps for Oxfordians a case where John's waffling about it, his desires versus not wanting responsibility for it, might be another situation of a cousin, and that would have been Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots, who was Elizabeth's cousin, and Arthur is being called cousin by John in this play. So I'm going to spare you what's called the mawkish pre-Dickensian plunge into almost laughable sentimentality of the first scene in Act 4, where Hubert has been instructed by John to kill the kid. However, something has shifted, and this is another example of the shift between the troublesome reign, that anonymous earlier play, and King John, the canonical play, where initially John, I think, did want the kid blinded, and then Hubert, well, it's a mess. But in this case, somewhere between John wanted him dead and Hubert saying, okay, I got to put your eyes out with a hot poker, that's been the transition. So little Arthur says, oh, please no. And by the way, the kid was historically a teenager, but usually in Shakespeare productions of this that are rare, they make him much younger so that he can have that little squeaky voice, and we're supposed to, weep bitterly about it all. But anyway, Hubert's going to poke his eyes out, and the kid just keeps talking and says, oh, Hubert, but, and there's some mention of womanish tears in this scene too. Again, womanish being the designation for tears, even though they're coming from the male's thematically throughout the play. Ultimately, Hubert chickens out and decides, no, I can't do this. I've been your babysitter for all these years, and I'm going to keep you safe, but I'm going to have to report that you're dead. And so Hubert takes off for the court of John. In the meantime, John is trying to convince himself and others that this idea of him being crowned twice, going through a second coronation ceremony, is really a good idea. But one of the lords says, to guard a title that was rich before, to gild refined gold, to paint the lily, to throw perfume on the violet, is wasteful and ridiculous excess. So gilding the lily is what we get out of there too. The lords are suspicious about John and his intentions for Prince Arthur. And when Hubert comes in and whispers aside to John, and presumably is saying that, yes, I killed the kid. And John initially could tell the lords, what, there's no problem, he's alive. But now he has to say, because he thinks the kid's dead, he has to tell the lords, oh, it's really sad, he died of a disease, what can you do? The lords are really suspicious anyway about all of this. And one of the lords says, we're going to go and retrieve the body and find the inheritance of this poor child, his little kingdom of a forced grave. And the echo there is of an EO poem regarding, what do you want to crave? A kingdom or a cottage or a grave? And another Earl of Oxford connection there. Out of the blue, we hear, oh no, Eleanor's dead, John's mother. Oh, bummer. Hey, also Constance died too. So basically the women of the play are excised at this point. The bastard has been on the mission of collecting loot from the churches, and he's encountered some unrest about all of that. Surprise. But he also has encountered a Peter of Pomfret. Yeah, this is a prophet who says that John will give up the throne before noon on the next Ascension Day, which is 40 days after Easter. Just so you know. John backpedals regarding Arthur's supposed death with Hubert, blaming Hubert and saying, oh, I never meant to imply anything of the sort. And then Hubert's able to say, oh, good, so you don't want him dead. Well, guess what? I didn't kill him. He's alive. Everything's fine. Then John, in front of all these suspicious nobles, can say, hey, wait, the kid's alive. Everything's fine. So once again, all this sidestepping of responsibility reminds some Oxfordians of Elizabeth concerning Mary, Queen of Scots, and the phrase about my cousin's death, which I never intended, even though I signed the paper. Oops, it was everybody else's fault. Well, back in prison, Arthur decides he's going to go in disguise. We don't know why, and he's going to escape. So he can only go up to the wall and think, all right, maybe I can jump down here and escape. And here is little Arthur's final scene.
The wall is high, and yet will I leap down? Good crown, be pitiful and hurt me not. There's few or none do know me. If they did, this shipboy's semblance hath disguised me quite. I am afraid, and yet I'll venture it. If I get down and do not break my limbs, I'll find 1,000 shifts to get away. As good to die and go as die and stay. Oh me, my uncle's spirit is in these stones. Heaven, take my soul, and England keep my bones.
Historically, we don't know how young Arthur died for real. But when all the lords show up, expecting him now, as was recently announced by John, to be alive, and then they find the body dead, they are despairing. They blame John all the more, and they figure Hubert is to blame too. Hubert comes upon the scene and he cries over the body, and more male tears here, but most of the lords and even the bastard are suspicious about the sincerity there. The bastard questions Hubert, and everybody else fears for England itself, including the bastard too, based on whatever was behind this event. It seems like Hubert does make his case successfully to this one guy, but everybody's off on a tear anyway about this outrage. And some of it's pretty extreme. It's like, this is worse than the Holocaust. I mean, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in human history. Well, it's sad, but okay, fine. But a lot of these lords then defect and go over to France against John. John then, in our last act, reconciles with the church, and when he does, in other words, comply with Pandulph and the Catholics' designs, it's basically him giving up his stand. And then he realizes, oh, just like Peter the prophet said, it's Ascension Day. But I always thought giving up the crown would be by force, and I willingly gave my power back to the church, and so it doesn't count. So that's fine, except, now we've got this deal making so that maybe we don't have to be at war with France and the Catholics, and it's just more crazy commodity politics. In the meantime, John has weakened as a character in this play, and it takes the bastard to give him this great pep talk. To be great in act as you have been in thought. And it seems as if it would be a good speech for Oxford to be giving Elizabeth in one of her weaker moments, too. Well, the bastard, nevertheless, is miserable at learning that John has catered to Pandulph, and he advises that they attack the French. John gives command to the bastard, which is just kind of crazy politics, but that's the way they went. And the echo of what might have been the truth in Oxford's life seems to be some speculation that Oxford may have been entrusted with political and diplomatic missions involving espionage in the same way that Philip the Bastard acts as John's eyes and ears on the continent. That, again, is Charles Beauclerc. And I would say that the time that Eleanor and I spent in Italy in the archives kind of strengthens that idea. In another scene, the lords, having to fight, they feel, against their own countrymen, are in misery and torn, and Salisbury is one. The Salisbury character is minor in all this. He does have some lines, but the fact is that the historical Salisbury actually was a royal bastard of Henry II. So not like he was in line for the throne, but he would have been a half brother to King John. So this character is running around the play historically and is a bastard, but Shakespeare decided, no, I want this other character to inhabit. There's a mention of an earthquake of nobility, that they're going over to the other side. And there was, of course, an earthquake in 1580, which may help us date the earliest version of this play that doesn't show up until the first folio. I am too highborn to be propertied is a nice utterance from the bastard, who rings again that theme of property and legitimacy and being above the sleazy politics of commodity. There's a little message that John is not feeling too well, and he's gone over to, I'm sure it's called Swinsed Abbey, but it's spelled Swine's Head. Have fun. The lords ruminate about the state of affairs and how miserable everything is, and the one of the dying characters in the war now says that the English should fly. You're bought and sold, he tells them. And John is going to have to beg for forgiveness for the rebellion, and he's going to make it all okay with that. And the other problem is that if they stick with the French, Louis, who doesn't trust the English, is going to decapitate them all. So maybe better go back to John. There's a scene late in Act 5 where you're going to hear the echoes of Hamlet if you read this thing. Who's there? And so on. But the news is that John has been poisoned by a monk, and this is being reported to the bastard, I believe.
Brief then, and what's the news?
Oh, my sweet sir, news fitting to the night. Black, fearful, comfortless, and horrible.
Show me the very wound of this ill news. I am no woman. I'll not swoon at it.
The king, I fear, is poisoned by a monk. I left him almost speechless and broke out to acquaint you with this evil, that you might the better arm you to the sudden time than if you had at leisure known of this.
How did he take it? Who did taste to him?
A monk, I tell you, a resolved villain, whose bowels suddenly burst out. The king yet speaks, and peradventure may recover.
Who didst thou leave to tend his majesty?
Why, know you not? The lords are all come back, and brought Prince Henry in their company, at whose request the king hath pardoned them, and they are all about his majesty.
Withhold thine indignation, mighty heaven, and tempt us not to bear above our power. I tell thee, Hubert, half my power this night, passing these flats, are taken by the tide. These Lincoln washes have devoured them. Myself well mounted, hardly have escaped away before. Conduct me to the king. I doubt he will be dead or ere I come.
So it seems like much is resolved here. The returning English lords are going to be pardoned, and that's all right, except for King John feeling a little under the weather. Well, in the last scene, young Prince Henry comes on to the stage, and most productions, because of the tragedy of the death of Arthur, will cast Arthur, now gone, in the role of Prince Henry too. And then I guess we feel like additionally things are healed and we can move forward. But at the beginning of the final scene, Prince Henry's pretty realistic about his father's impending death. But a lot of the lords have faith that the future Henry III will be the answer to our problems. King John is carried in, and here is the end of John.
I marry now, my soul hath elbow room. It would not out at windows nor at doors. There is so hot a summer in my bosom that all my bowels tremble up to dust. I'm a scribbled form, drawn with a pen upon a parchment, and against this fire do I shrink up.
How fares your majesty?
Poisoned, it'll fare dead, forsook, cast off. And none of you will bid the winter come to thrust his icy fingers in my maw, nor let my kingdom's rivers take their course through my burned bosom, nor entreat the north to make his bleak winds kiss my parched lips and comfort me with cold. I do not ask you much. I beg cold comfort, and you are so straight and so ingrateful, you deny me that.
Oh, there was some virtue in my tears that might relieve you.
The salt in them is hot. Within me is a hell, and there the poison is as a fiend confined to tyrannize on unreprievable condemned blood.
Oh, I am scalded with my violent motion, and spleen of speed to see your majesty.
O cousin, thou art come to set mine eye. The tackle of my heart is cracked and burned, and all the shrouds wherewith my life should sail are turned to one thread, one little hair. My heart hath one poor string to stray it by, which holds but till thy news be uttered. And then all this thou seest is but a clod and module of confounded royalty.
The Dauphin is preparing hitherward, where heaven he knows how we shall answer him. For in a night the best part of my power, as I upon advantage did remove, were in the washes all unwarily devoured by the unexpected flood.
You breathe these dead news in as dead an ear. My liege, my lord, but now a king, now thus.
Even so, must I run on, and even so stop? What surety of the world, what hope, what stay, when this was now a king, and now is clay?
How gone so? I do but stay behind to do the office for thee of revenge, and then my soul shall wait on thee in heaven, as it on earth hath been thy servant still. Now, you stars that move in your right spheres, where be your powers? Show now your mended faiths, and instantly return with me again, to push destruction and perpetual shame out of the weak door of our fainting land. Straight let us seek, or straight we shall be sought. The Dauphin rages at our very heels.
It seems you know not, then, so much as we. The Cardinal Pandulph is within at rest, who half an hour since came from the Dauphin, and brings from him such offers of our peace as we with honor and respect may take, with purpose presently to leave this war.
He will rather do it when he sees ourselves will sinew to our defence.
Nay, it is in a manner done already.
Let it be so. And you, my noble prince, with other princes that may best be spared, shall wait upon your father's funeral. And happily, may your sweet self put on the lineal state of glory of the land, to whom with all submission on my knee I do bequeath my faithful service and true subjection everlastingly.
And the like tender of our love we make, to rest without a spot for evermore.
I have a kind soul that would give you thanks, knows not how to do it but with tears.
Oh, let us pay the time with needful woe, since it hath been beforehand with our griefs. This England never did, nor never shall, lie at the proud foot of a conqueror, but when it first did help to wound itself. Now these princes are come home again. Come these three corners of the world in arms, and we shall shook them. Naught shall make us rue, if England to itself do rest but true.
Final word, true, truth, Vere. We're not really sure what killed John historically. There is that legend, and I think there's a Robin Hood ballad too, that says he was poisoned by a monk, disgruntled at the ravaging of the abbeys. But one of Shakespeare's historical sources, Hollingshead, claims that it was an ague when he was being pursued by his enemies. He gorged himself on raw peaches and cider at Swine at Abbey, and died in agony in 1216. So peaches and cider apparently is a problem that we can take away morally from this play. Most people think that the only time we can have any sympathy for John is in his dying, and we might know others where we cannot have any sympathy for these people, but in the shared experience ultimately of dying. What the bastard finally says might be more appropriate to Elizabeth from Oxford than from the bastard to John, but is there any real difference? So the last utterance by the next king, Henry III, does regard about those tears again. And we're told from one of the critics, were it not for the bastard, the play would end in a whimper. Instead, it ends with one of the most resolutely patriotic speeches in English drama. And you might be reminded of what eventually Shakespeare will have John of Gaunt say in the Henry IV play. In the end, seems like the bastard was the most kingly figure in all of this. And I don't know what to wrap up with except for a couple quotations from the experts. One, again, my favorite critic, Harold Goddard, says that this was about the unkingliest king Shakespeare ever created. And Harold Bloom, too, who I usually don't want to give any space to, does say that readers are likely to feel that the natural son of Richard the Lionheart, the bastard, deserves a better play than the one in which he finds himself, and a better king to serve than his wretched uncle John. All right. Now, if we're ready, I can check out the Q&A and see what's been going on there. Is that the way we do it here? All right, I typed into the chat, I think. The initial question is, who's doing that singing? And that's a former student of mine, Balana Bogar, who is working in a law office right now, getting ready to go to law school, and is so completely sunken into that she doesn't have time to do my next two songs. Okay, there seems to be much in this play that dates quite early. Much is relevant no later than the 1580s. Any thoughts on this? And yes. So most Oxfordians think it's coming out in the early 1580s. And what I didn't pursue in my own thinking is that, is this a play coming out when Oxford is in disgrace and banished from court? That earthquake from 1580 might be an indication of the timeline here. But most of it does seem early Shakespeare. The episodic nature of it all, how it doesn't hold together, even when Shakespeare is working with two different plots, which might have originally been, as Catherine Chilton suggests, two court entertainments. Like, I think you get two plots woven together in Twelfth Night. Here, it's just this early struggling with historical matters and how much we're going to bend them and compress them and make it all into one play, since some of that Arthur stuff is only very early in John's reign. And then the excommunication and the French connection and all the rest of that has been mashed together here. So he seems to be still learning his craft, even when he's revising his earlier troublesome reign of John. And then between the early 80s and when it's finally published in the first folio, we know nothing. Does the commodity speech share any similarity to Oxford's intro to Cardeno's Comfort, 1572? That is not a text ringing in my ears, but it's very possible, and it would make sense. So I will check that out, actually. I'll probably not be able to resist doing it today, too, now that you put that in my head. Wasn't it Henry II who referred to Thomas Becket as a meddlesome priest? Yes, absolutely. It's practically a quotation here in the play when you've got obstacles and you are a questionable king. Are there any records showing this play was performed at that time, especially for the Queen? Not that I know of and not that I read. There's only the suspicion that the twice removed earlier John Bale play on King John might have been performed at Hedingham and would have therefore influenced Oxford sufficiently to think, look at the parallels. Leicester was a popular poisoner. Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, probably so. And Lord Strange. Yeah, okay. So for the poisoning, I don't know that Oxford would have recognized Leicester's potential poisoner position this early because the guy Sussex, who we think might have served as a nice mentor for Oxford and dying said, "Beware the gypsy you do not know is evil," like I do, damning Leicester at that point. And then Amy at the bottom of the staircase and all the other suspects of Leicester's poisoning and murderous rampage might not have registered with Oxford at this early stage, maybe. What is the contemporary evidence for Oxford as bastard? It's only, of course, and what's the evidence for him to go on too? This is the frustrating matter in Hamlet and elsewhere. Like, who is who? Who's there? The evidence is only the reports that I mentioned, that Howard and Arundel reported that Oxford, had a fit about Elizabeth calling him bastard. And the lawsuit, one or two lawsuits from that half-sister in 1563 that tried to wrangle some lands out of the deal if the 16th Earl's second marriage wasn't valid. Could it be the Chronicle plays were issued to different playwrights as part of Elizabeth's propaganda machine? Yeah, I suppose. But, I'm not a real fan of commodity. The sellout notion that everybody was Shakespeare. It was a big group that got together. Because I don't know about you, but I've been part of a group and we never got anything done. Except we ate some donuts during the break. We could all agree on that. What is Michael Biggin's interesting observation about a possible reference to the Magna Carta? That's in the Q&A, but it seems to be referring to something in the chat, right? Okay, I'm gonna maybe when fleeting, oblique reference to the Magna Carta after all, the metonymy of his being scribbled on a parchment. That is a point that's made and appreciated by the scholars, that reference to feeling like you're scribbled on a parchment. Maybe so. Maybe that is a Bleeko reference. Even more so, though, Shakespeare takes that idea of people as text, stand and unfold yourself. But even more in some of the romances and Midsummer Night's Dream, where people seem to be some sort of text, even legal texts, and are thought of that way, embodied that way. And Audrey in As You Like It is going to take on the name, of somebody. Who's it going to be? Audrey. Is she going to take on the name of William? Or is she going to take on the name of the courtier who is wooing her? So I think that whole question about text is fascinating in the Shakespeare world. All right, let's wrap up. So once again, you can plunge further into the Oxfordian perspective on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website, shakespeareoxfordfellowship.org, where you'll find all kinds of resources and links, and I think some delightful videos. For more of my commentary from today and other things, you can visit my website, michaeldelahoyde.org, and you'll find other suggested further reading, a slightly annotated filmography, and other information. And this time with King John, since there's so few productions of the thing, I added all these other clips from Robin Hood movies and the Disney film of Robin Hood and Delightful Song, and just there's other stuff there for King John. If you're watching this on YouTube, links to more information will probably be in the description. And I, lastly, not leastly, want to thank our actors. Frank Lawler was King John. How he got from Horatio to that, I don't know. Magic. Costa Chard was the bastard, and I'm glad not to have to say that anymore. Colleen Moriarty was Eleanor. Michael Dudley was Chatillon. Rosemary Lachlan was Constance. Tom Woosnam was Pandulph. Alan Armstrong was Hubert. And Xavier Adams was Arthur and Henry. And as always, special thanks to Jennifer Newton for illuminating Shakespeare Illuminated.